Same situation here. So now the students are starting protests. Students and the media can't wait. The media can't wait to televise these protests. Before my appearance on Fox yesterday was a 4-minute pre-taped interview that Chris Wallace had done with some of the organizing students at the school. And this is where I say you've got to be very careful discussing this because, the emotion that results when people are triggered can then render everything else that I might say afterward unheard. What if I were to say to you that I'm listening to some of the students and their interviews, and the way they're talking sounds very familiar to me? Feel like I've heard this before. You starting to get nervous of what I might say next? You start to say, Rush, don't go there. Don't go there. Don't get into headlines on this one, Rush. Don't go there. Just stop right now. Are you saying that? Do you think you know where I'm headed next with this? Well, let's take a break. You can relax for a minute. We'll come back and we will continue. Do not go away. The first question that I was asked yesterday by Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday was, what do you think about this idea of students mobilizing across the country? A march on Washington, march in communities, students trying to get politicians to act. What do you think of that?
What I found interesting about the students, and they're very articulate, and you have to feel for them. And, I mean, it's wrecked their lives. They are a combination scared and angry. But, Chris, I have to ask if anybody's really serious about solving this, because none of this, and by the way, I couldn't care less about the gun angle of this. None of this is going to solve it. Prayers and condolences don't solve it, and marches aren't going to solve it. Chris, the next shooter is out there. The next shooter probably has the gun that he's going to use. The next shooter is known by many people in his community who are concerned that this guy may do what everybody's afraid he's going to do. Now, how is anything that we're talking about going to stop that? We have got to realize this is what our country has become. We can wish that it weren't this way, and we can wish that Congress could legislate it away, but they can't. It's not the fault of the NRA. It's not the fault of it's the fault of the people doing this and our inability to deal with that and stop them. We have security, armed security at virtually every public entity in this country except schools. For some reason, they are a gun-free zone, and everybody who wants to shoot up a school knows that they're going to be the only one armed. Until we're really to get serious about where we are and how do we stop this from happening, and marches aren't going to do it, saying no more guns isn't going to do it, bashing the NRA isn't going to do it.
I don't see how any of that is arguable. To me, that is just straight down the line, fact, common sense, intelligence guided by experience. But of course, there are people outraged that I said it. And they're outraged because they think what I said, that the students don't matter. And I didn't say that at all. I said it isn't going to stop the next shooter. And Congress isn't either. Anyway, let's go to the phones. We have Annie here, Columbus, Ohio. Great to have you. I'm glad you're up first today. Welcome.
Hi, Rush. What an honor. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Common sense dittos. And I think you're hinting around at this, and I hope you don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but how did these kids, these poor kids, they just went through something so traumatic, yet they managed to organize and arrange a march on Washington. They even have a date. I mean, you can't just pick a date out of thin air and everyone meets up in D.C. There's a lot of planning. You got to organize an event like this. My theory is there are certain community organizers working with the deep state in the FBI to ignore this kid, maybe to allow something to happen. And they don't let a good crisis go to waste, and I think this was a good crisis. What do you think?
Well, now, wait a minute. You were on to something until that last half there. When you think the deep state is behind this, for what reason? You think that the deep state was in the FBI to ignore this? hoping something would happen because they don't want to let a good crisis go to. So you think they wanted to create the crisis? They knew the shooter was out there, and they purposely didn't stop him because they want what they've got right now. Is that your point?
I think it's awful suspicious that within 2 or 3 days, these kids have this whole thing organized.
Okay, now that's a different thing. That's a you're talking two separate. Let's deal with that.
Yeah.
Let's deal with that. This is a shrewd perception of yours. You have judged that the students, 17, 18, 16 years old, simply in their emotional distress, would have needed some assistance to come up with some scheme or some operation this grand, this organized, this quickly. So who are you suggesting is behind this?
I'm just thinking certain community organizers who want to create chaos.
Well, the chaos is there.
Yes.
The chaos is already there. I think what you mean is there are people wanting to capitalize on the chaos.
Absolutely. Right. And who better than young skulls full of mush?
Well, let me say something about that. And I meant thank you very much, Carrie, for the call. I watched some of these students last week on TV, and I have to tell you, I'm not around people that age because I don't have kids. My nephews and nieces are approaching. Some of them are and beyond that age now. And I tell you, folks, they are amazingly articulate. The people I saw on TV, students, they were amazingly articulate. I was genuinely impressed and dazzled. I thought I was listening to people much older than they were in their reactions to this. I was not listening to anger and the protest type stuff. I was listening to them answering questions about the moment and what it was like, and they were willing to answer deeply personal questions. But then a couple of days went by, and we began to hear the students being interviewed about their protest plans and their march plans. And I thought I had heard some of the language before. And I started putting two and two together. And I realized that this, while they were saying that we were not doing anything political, it was the essence of political. And it was the essence, she's right, of community organizing politics. So I'm like her. I wondered, how did this get put together so quickly? And who is doing that, if indeed that happened? And I don't doubt that it did. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the students here. I don't want to be misunderstood on this at all. I'm not questioning their motives by any stretch. As I say, they've been traumatized. They're angry and they are scared. And you remember me telling you throughout the history of this program that one of the ways that this nation's always stayed on course is that eventually a generation comes along, and you never know which one, that's every 3 to 5 generations, that ultimately says, we reject the way our grandparents and parents live, and they don't want any part of it. And they reform. They try to take their lives and their country in a different direction. Could this current generation of millennials be that generation? We'll have to see. I have to take a break here. Not through with this. Be patient. We'll be back. Welcome back. El Rushbo with half my brain tied behind my back, because we do fairness here better than anybody in the media does fairness. When I first saw the signs that the students were carrying, and when I first heard about the National Day of March or Protest or whatever, and when I heard some of the students in the interview section of the Fox News Sunday show yesterday and other places, I thought to myself, this sounds just like a Democrat Party. It sounds just like the way they organize things. But the students were saying, no, this is not political. And their messaging said, Democrats, Republicans, you've goofed up. You've made mistakes. This is not political. But yet everything they're doing is right out of the Democrat Party's various playbooks. It has the same enemies, the NRA and guns. You can't take social media out of the equation here. Social media is the primary information source for young people today, and they know where to go to get what they want to hear. They know places to avoid. Everybody does. Places to avoid if you don't want to be confronted by things that challenge your worldview. But just to me, it's a classic Democrat campaign to say something isn't what it is in order to give it legitimacy. Because everybody knows that once anything becomes political, then it isn't pure. It isn't innocent. It isn't real. Politics, at worst, corrupts and at least shapes and infects. And whenever you see the initial reaction to an event like this being what every other initial reaction has been, and then when you realize that reaction, that objective is right out of the Democrat Party playbook, or bigger than that, the American leftist playbook, then the conclusion seems automatic and obvious. Why are all of the students that we're seeing, why are all of the students on camera answering questions, being interviewed, why are all of them saying pretty much the same thing in a political context or political sense? So our last caller thinks that community organizers, and by that she means people like Obama, and let's not forget this guy, Robert Kramer. Got to mix subjects here. You look at this Russian indictment, and the Russians are portrayed as absolute swine for what they did. But they can't hold a candle to what Robert Kramer was doing. The only difference is that what Kramer was doing was technically not illegal. The Russians, as foreigners, were engaging in illegal activity. But what does the indictment allege that the Russians were doing? Well, they were on social media, and they were inciting action. They were sowing discord. They were doing things designed to get Americans to question the validity of their own political process and elections. And in this process, they were trying to supposedly shape the outcome of votes. And if you read the indictment carefully, you find that Hillary was the one that the Russians expected to win. And that's the reason why so much of what they were doing was pitched against her. Everybody in the world thought Hillary was going to win. The Russians thought Hillary was going to win. Trump thought Hillary was going to win. The media thought Hillary was going to win. Everybody did. What, are you shaking your head in there, Mr. Snerdley? You didn't? Well, you and I are among a rare few who didn't think Hillary was going to win. But most people did, including the Russians. And it's clear the Russians did not expect Trump to win. So it's very convenient for the media to say that the indictment illustrates that the Russians were trying to help Trump. No, they weren't. They were trying to damage America by damaging whoever they thought was going to win. They wanted to destroy our confidence in the political system. But they're not alone in this. And they are pikers compared to all the other Americans that were participating in social media trying to accomplish the same thing. Now, the proof of what I'm saying is that when Trump wins, all of a sudden the Russians are promoting anti-Trump rallies. During the campaign, the Russians are promoting anti-Hillary rallies, and they're out there doing rallies for Trump. Then Trump wins, and it turns everything upside down. And within a week of the election, the Russians are sponsoring and conducting anti-Trump rallies. And yet everybody thinks the Russians were in this to make sure Trump won. The Russians were in this to sow discord against whoever won. They would love to break down our system. They are an enemy, and they're not alone in this. There were 90 Russians, best I can tell. None of them will ever be indicted. Well, none of them be extradited. None of them will ever face charges. There will not be a trial. We will not learn who did this. We will not see the faces. We won't know anything more than we know. And the people that filed the charges knew that. Mueller and Rosenstein all know that this is nothing more than a PR statement. This series of indictments is never going to result in a trial. And in fact, you know what it's similar to? This is similar to the Clinton administration. How did they want to deal with terrorism? In the courts. They wanted to indict Osama bin Laden, and they did. Remember the wall we had with Jamie Gorelick on one side? The FBI, CIA were not allowed to know what each was doing during counter-terror investigations. And whenever there was a terrorist act, we wanted to indict. Well, here it's repeating itself. The Russians conducted an attack. It was a cyber attack, and they were doing it. What do we answer with? An indictment. But this indictment features something that will never happen, and that's a trial. There will never be anything more than what we have now. And so we're left to conclude the Russians are a bunch of bad guys, but it was 90 people, and their budget was under $2 million. They are pikers. Now, Robert Kramer, you thought I lost my place, but I never lose my place. Robert Kramer was hired by Hillary Clinton to hire people to attend Trump rallies and cause fights and protests. They were paid. How do we know this? Robert Kramer was videotaped admitting it unwittingly. It was a Project Veritas sting operation. And this guy Kramer is a Democrat operative married to a woman who's a Democrat congressman from Chicago, Illinois. And he's right. He's proudly admitting what they did. The sting artist is faking interest in being hired for one of these operations. And then we find out, looking at White House logs, that this guy Robert Kramer's been in and out of the West Wing hundreds of times, with something like 18 or 20 personal visits with Obama in the Oval Office. Now, how is that any different what the Russians did? Well, my point is that what Kramer was doing was attempting to undermine their political opponent by making it look like at Trump rallies that most of the people there hated Trump. And they even succeeded in getting a Trump rally in Chicago canceled because of the threat of violence. And the thing is, it was real, but it was fake. It was bought and paid for. They had to pay anti-Trump people to show up. So what does this have to do with the school protest? Well, it's right out of the same playbook. This is, and I'm sorry for realizing it. I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm a veteran student of American politics. I'm a highly trained and well-steeped analyst, and I've seen all of this before. I've seen this kind of behavior in the Hillary Clinton bus tour for her health care plan back in the 90s. We saw this at the Wellstone Memorial back in 2002, where the Democrats hijacked a funeral service or a memorial to advance their political agenda, and they do it. They operate under the premise that everybody is angry and hates Republicans or Trump, the president of the day. Back then it was George W. Bush. And the pictures, when these marches and protests happen, the pictures and the accompanying stories are going to be what? They're going to be totally anti-Trump. They're going to be totally anti-Republican. They're going to be totally anti-NRA. It's as predictable as if the Democrats were announcing this march and announcing these protests. So, yeah, you wonder how it could have been put together so quickly, and who helped and who did it. Speaking of the NRA, this is important to point out. I pointed it out on Friday, but this is a kind of statistic that needs to be continually pummeled. In 19 years, from, well, with the last of the years being 2017, so what would that be? 1997, 2007, whatever it is. The NRA, in 20 years, let's just put this way, with the most recent year of study being 2017, in 20 years, the NRA spent $200 million on politics. Wow. Man, that's a lot of money. Yeah, but not really. The unions in 2017 alone spent $1.7 billion. $1.7 billion in 1 year. The NRA, $200 million in 20 years. The NRA's power does not derive from having politicians in its back pocket. The NRA's strength and power does not result from them buying every politician in sight. They don't spend that kind. But you'll never know that if you listen to any of the protest, any of the anger that is forthcoming in the aftermath of the event. It's all aimed at Trump, and it's all aimed at the NRA, and it's all misinformed. The NRA's strength is the record number of American citizens who are members. They are a flat-out, kick-ass grassroots organization, and their power derives from how many members they've got and how deeply connected to the organization those members are, not the money they spend buying votes, because they are pikers in that area. But you would never know that, and you won't know that if you watch mainstream drive-by media and their continual harangue, which is as predictable as the sun coming up after each one of these incidents when they happen. So I checked the email during the break. Very predictable. Mr. Limbaugh, how dare you? How dare you exhibit such insensitivity during this intense grief? How dare you? And you see, my friends, yet another point is illustrated. One cannot challenge the governing emotions of the moment. If one does, one becomes the bad guy. One becomes the enemy. In this instance, the grieving are permitted any opinion. They are not to be challenged, disagreed with, or anything of the sort. To do so is to be insensitive and insulting. And so that's the risk that truth seekers often take. Here is Steve in Chicago. Great to have you on the program. I'm glad you waited, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, sir. This is an exciting opportunity.
You bet.
The thought came to my mind that none of these shootings, as far as I can tell from research, have happened in a private or religious school. They've all occurred in public schools. And so the question is, what is going on in our public school systems, or what are the other schools doing differently? I'm not saying that it can't happen in these schools, just that it hasn't.
Right. So have you come up with an answer with that? Have you come up with a satisfactory answer? You're asking yourself this question. And have
you, I think there's moral and societal issues. On a separate note, I agree with basically hardening, you have to harden the target. And what you said as far as concealed carry, I agree with. But
you know what? So does a survivor from Columbine has just come out and acknowledged the need for concealed carry. I just saw the link at the Drudge Report. Haven't clicked on it yet, but that's the headline. And by the way, let me define, I don't mean students concealed carry, and I don't mean every teacher. You don't need that. You just need the knowledge that there are people. There is security in the place that's armed. Right now, we don't have that. They are open, free, and clear for anybody who wants to walk in and start shooting. Remember, folks, we had from not long ago, there was actually a school district, I think in Texas, that suggested students bring in canned goods so that if a shooter showed up, you'd have the canned goods in your desk to start throwing at the shooter. They were dead serious about it. Now, your point about public schools but not religious or private schools, yeah, I mean, that is an inescapable observation. It's true.
Well, I have a little bit of experience. If I could go into a little bit of my background.
Yeah, have at it.
I'm currently a law enforcement officer for 9 years. Prior, I was a school teacher in the city of Chicago, and I worked in public schools and in Catholic schools. And so I have some experience. And
so what's the difference?
Differences between schools? Well, I mean, there's
okay.
There's almost no rules in the public school, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
That.
Right. He can't say the difference. This is exactly. You hear him stutter? Well, he knows exactly what the differences are, and he can't say them. He doesn't feel comfortable saying them on the most listened to radio talk show in America. Another point that I made in the first hour. It is political correctness and all that that's just silencing everybody from making any sense on this and a whole lot of other things out there. Man, oh man, we've only got 1 hour remaining here. And still so much material begging to be used. So hang in, folks, and we'll be back here before you know it. Hang on just a second, folks. Taking a note here. I just heard something. Got to write it all down. Forget it. Okay. Greetings and welcome back. Great to have you here. El Rushbo and the EIB Network at the Limbaugh Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. No graduates, no degrees, because the learning never stops. Although I'm thinking about selling, well, I'm just joking about that, but people are asking. They want some acknowledgement that they are accomplished students here at the Institute. Now, I just heard a student on TV. It's a tape announcing the march and the protests. And see, this is the thing. It is very, very tough to go here. I know this. Like that email I got. I can't believe you. So insensitive at a time the students are sensing such grief. I'm not trying to be insensitive at all. I'm trying to be helpful. I'm actually trying. Hang on a minute. Stupid screensaver. I'm trying, my friends, to facilitate actual solutions to this. There's not a one of us that likes these events. There's not a one of us that doesn't take these seriously. But I just heard one of the students in the high school, don't have a name, doesn't matter who it is, say in a little soundbite announcing the march or whatever's coming up, that elected officials, our elected officials, must get together and put aside their political differences and move on toward solving the problem. All well and good. It's never going to happen because the students are articulating the position largely held by the Democrat Party. How in the world can political differences be put aside when even the marchers and their agenda sounds very similar to that of the Democrat Party, which is find a way to get rid of the guns and find a way to get rid of the NRA. Now, there's no distinction. That's exactly what the Democrat Party agenda is. And if you want to argue with that, don't waste time, because that is totally what their agenda is. The long-term goal of the left is to eliminate all guns, to confiscate every gun in this country. That's what they want to do. Of course, that's never going to happen. It's not even possible. So that'll give you an idea of where the solution here resides. There isn't one if the Democrat Party is involved. If that's their wish list, if that's their ultimate objective, then you realize it's never going to happen, that what they want is not possible, and yet they're going to keep striving for it. Where does that leave us? But this is the trick. This is how the Democrats and community organizers do it. They set themselves up as above the political fray. They triangulate. They say, we are not these skank Democrats and skank Republicans. We demand a solution on our level. And all it is, community organizers are what, folks? For what and whom do they organize and advocate? They're Democrats, they're leftists, they're liberals, they're socialists, they're communists. By definition, that's who they are. So when somebody says our elected officials must get together and put aside their political differences, that is designed to be fully embraced by the American people, because the American people are going to embrace that like yesterday. The American people are going to go, yeah, Republicans and Democrats, shut up and solve it. And that's what the students are saying. And so the impressed, boy, these students are on the ball. Man, these students get it. And then what's the next thing you hear? We must put aside our political differences, and we've got to stop the spread of guns, and we've got to get guns out of the hands of people. We've got to get rid of the NRA and its influence over members of Congress. Bingo! So the above the fray crowd has now adopted the Democrat agenda. But the media doesn't report it that way. The media reports the Democrat agenda as being above the fray. The media reports the Democrat agenda, they promote the Democrat agenda as not being politics. And this is why I say, as long as the media is involved in this, and as long as the media is leading this and characterizing it, then you're never going to get a solution. So you'll have a group of students in their grief, and they'll be saying, stop the guns, ban the guns, or whatever it is. And the media picks that up and treats it with total legitimacy as an objective. And it's especially important because these are the students, and they were the ones most deeply affected. They are the ones suffering the deepest grief. They are suffering. They're the ones who were harmed. They're the ones who were the targets. They're the ones that we need to listen to above all. This is how it works. So what they say gets promoted as above the fray. And what is above the fray is the Democrat agenda. It's not just this. It's everything. It's the budget. It's dealing with terrorism. It's dealing with immigration. The trick for the drive-by media is to portray the Democrat agenda as apolitical and above the political fray. That's how they do it. They never characterize anything as liberal. They only characterize things as right-wing, alt-right, conservative, extreme conservative, radical conservative. They never characterize anything on the left with a label. It's just mainstream. It's just what is. Here's an anti-gun violence rally going on in Los Angeles. The T-shirts, Moms Demand Action for Gun. I couldn't read it. Oh, and now here's a letter. A 7-year-old has written Trump a letter, and it's now being promoted there on CNN. Why, this goes back to the school lunch program, when 7-year-olds were writing President Clinton saying, please, or writing Republican leaders, please don't starve us. We can't learn if we're hungry. Same page flavor. Folks, it's the same process. It is the exact same technique that is being used here. You take a position that is said to be above politics. Our elected officials must get together and put aside their political differences. Yay! Yay! Then the next thing is the things that the students want. And it happened to be the Democrat agenda. And the Democrat agenda is then catapulted to new heights. It isn't political. Plus, it's what the students want. Who can deny the students? They're suffering and they're traumatized, and this is how it works. And it's being enacted right in front of us, right before our very eyes. And the objective of this, what is the objective? Put on your thinking caps here, folks. What's the objective of all of this? Is it to prevent the next shooting? No, but it's made to look like that. It's made to look like that's what we all want here, but that's not what this is going to do. No. That's not the purpose of this. It's not the purpose of the march. It's not the purpose of the protests. It's not the purpose of anything. The solution to this resides elsewhere, but it's not in the march, and it's not in slogans. It's not in T-shirts. It's not in internet, Twitter hashtags or any of that. The objective, I'll back off. I'll let you fill in your own blank. And if you want to tell me what you think the objective is when you call in, fine. And then now